Good day to everyone. This is your Professor Next Door, and here we are for another great video discussion. So, since this is the start of the opening of classes, most of our readings in Philippine history classes will focus on the basics of understanding history. So, in terms of understanding history, we have to know saan nga ba nanggagaling ang content ng mga inaaral natin sa history. So, dito papasok yung pag-aaral natin sa tinatawag natin na primary and secondary sources. So, ngayon, pag-uusapan natin what is the difference between the primary and secondary sources and the importance of both sources and, of course, the pros and cons of using the primary and secondary sources. We will also talk about the different types or kinds of primary and secondary sources. So let's start with the primary source. So when we talk about the primary source, this is the original source or object or document. It means this is the first-hand information. And then primary source is also the material written or produced during the time that the period that you might be investigating. So the artifacts, materials, documents that were used or personally came from the subject of our social science research or historical research are called as primary source. So the primary source enables the researcher to get close as possible with what really happened during a significant historical event. So basically, primary source is our way of getting the original information, unadulterated and unfiltered information about a certain historical topic or historical research. So now, let's move over to the different types of primary sources. So first one, we have diaries and journals. So as we can see, Jose Rizal is one of the historical personalities that wrote a lot of entries in his journals and in his diaries. So, isa sa magandang share ko sa inyo na primary source when it comes to Jose Rizal are a sample from his diary. So, let's try to read. So, eto, sabi dito, 2 nights ago, that is 30th of December, I had a frightful nightmare when I almost died. I dreamed that, imitating an actor dying on the stage, I felt vividly that my breath was failing and I was rapidly losing my strength. Then, my vision became dim and dense darkness enveloped me. They were the pangs of death. I wanted to shout and ask for help from Antonio Paterno. Feeling that I was about to die, I awoke weak and breathless. So, dun sa diary entry ni Jose Rizal nun, we can come up with the idea that Jose Rizal had was unaware that he had a premonition about his death. But natin nasabi? He mentioned that 2 nights ago, that is the 30th of December. So makita natin doon sa sinabi niya ni Jose Rizal, he had a dream about how he will die, which is, kung titignan natin, very close enough yung kanyang description sa kung paano siya mamamatay. Ang sabi niyang ganyan ay he dreamt that he was an actor dying on the stage. So kung titignan natin yung kamatayan ni Jose Rizal is like a actor dying on a stage because he died in front of many people, di ba? So dun sa primary source pa lang na yan, it will give us an idea that Jose Rizal unknowingly had a premonition or already had a foreshadowing kung paano siya mamamatay. So that's the power of primary source. So next, primary source can also be an autobiography. When we say autobiography, it is a written story by the person na pinag-aaralan natin. For example, autobiography ng isang president, autobiography ng isang kilalang actor, or autobiography ng isang kilalang historical or political personality. speeches are also considered as primary source. So aside from this type of documents, primary sources can be other important documents. Like for example, birth certificates, government records, titulo ng lupa, court documents, military records, and even pieces of art. Kaya pinag-aaralan din ang art creations nila Juan Luna and Felix Hidalgo as part of our history because they are a way of showing kung ano yung nangyari nung panahon na yun, and they are considered as primary sources. Ngayon, ang primary source, pwede ring pictures, pwedeng videos, di ba? So, pwede ring mga letters, mga correspondence. So, for example, yung mga soldiers during World War, for example, yung soldiers during World War, they wrote letters to their families about what they experienced during the war. Kaya yung mga nangyari doon sa front lines, and then yung mga nakikita natin sa mga movies na naganap during the war, some of them were based on what the soldiers or the survivors of the war was able to tell through the letters that they sent to their family members. So they can be considered as primary sources. So now, let's move over to the secondary source. Pag sinabi natin secondary source, this is something that was written after the event happened. Or pwede rin naman, yung isang primary source, may sinulat tayo tungkol dyan. Okay? So, usually, yung secondary source ay pwedeng product ng pag-aaral ng isang author about a primary source. Diba? So, pwede natin matawag na second-hand information ang secondary source. So, kapag primary source, ako mismo yung nagsabi. Yung secondary source, may nakinig sa akin at sila naman yung nagsabi sa'yo. So, meaning, primary, ako, yung secondary source, yung nakinig sa akin at sinabi sa iba. So, that's the difference between primary and secondary source. So there are a lot of different samples of secondary source. So halimbawa, biography. Pag sinabi nating biography, the life of a person was written by another. So yung mga makikita natin na biography tungkol sa ating mga heroes, those are secondary source dahil hindi sila mismo yung nagsulat nun. So, pwede natin matawag ang mga textbooks, encyclopedias, history books as example of secondary sources because they were written after the events occurred. So, titingnan natin kung pagkukumparahin natin ang primary source at secondary source, both have advantages and disadvantages. So, sa primary source, pwede nating sabihin na makikita natin doon yung questions of bias, yung purpose, and point of view. Diba? And then, makikita natin doon since this is unfiltered, medyo may mga vague intentions yung writer tungkol doon sa primary source. And kung titignan natin, primary source are often incomplete and have little context. Students must use prior knowledge and work with multiple primary sources to find patterns. So, ang ginagawa natin sa primary source, pinagkukumpara-kumpara natin. In analyzing primary sources, students move from concrete observations and facts to questioning and making inferences about the material. So, matrabaho ang pagkolekta at paggawa at in same time pag-interpret ng primary source. And hindi lahat ng primary source ay available para sa mga tao, especially in the general public. Okay? So, in terms naman sa advantage naman ng secondary source over sa primary source, secondary sources can provide analysis, synthesis, interpretation, or evaluation of the original information. Pero yun na nga, subject to the bias of the author. Diba? Secondary sources are best for uncovering background or historical information about a topic. So, pwedeng makita natin dito how an author understand the perspective. Pwede natin makita dito how different perspectives will be laid out. Diba? So, pwede natin mapagkumpara-kumpara. Diba? And it allows the reader to get expert views of events. So kung ikaw, casual ka lang na student or you're just interested in knowing about history and different historical topics, you can get the help of secondary sources and compile them to get the best possible answer do sa question na hinahanap mo when it comes sa primary source. But of course, it's also important to look over sa kung ano ang sinasabi ng primary source at ng mga nag-interpret tungkol dito, which is yung mga nasa secondary source. So, syempre, ang main disadvantage ng secondary source din ay hindi natin pwedeng masabi na ito ay first-hand knowledge and then may pagkakataon na mali-mali pa yung content ng secondary source. Kaya malaking issue rin, especially sa mga textbooks na ginagamit sa mga elementary and high school na may mga errors dahil yung kanilang sources mainly secondary na lang din. Diba? So, I think that's what makes the primary source and secondary source same and different. So, ngayon, sa pag-aaral, I would better suggest that we both look for primary source and secondary source. But of course, tignan natin ano ba yung reliable. Tignan natin, gawa natin ng effort na pagkumparahin yung sinasabi ng primary source at yung mga sinasabi ng secondary source para makita natin kung ano ba dito yung nagsasabi ng totoo. Dahil sa panahon ngayon, syempre, mahirap na dahil nagkalat yung fake news, nagkalat yung historical distortion. So, we better be careful when it comes to selecting primary and secondary sources. Okay? So, with that, thank you very much, and I hope that you have you enjoyed listening and you have learned something. So, please don't forget to subscribe and follow. So, thank you very much. This is your Professor Next Door. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Have a great day ahead.